My hockey team sucks. That's the title of the talk that I'm going to give today. It's kind of an exploration of a process that I went through. I'll give you more information on it in a second. So, my name is Rey Riel. I work on the developer relations team, so I'm an evangelist for a company called Click, and we have a data analytics engine. That's our core product. This is very much not a sales pitch for Click. I'm going to be using it, but we have a booth, so if you want to look to buy it, go see us there. Even though I'm an evangelist, I love playing with JavaScript. I spend a lot of my spare time just messing around with code, which is fun. Another thing to know about me is that I'm Canadian. So if this all sounds weird to you, this is just how you pronounce things properly. So that is my Twitter handle, at rjriel87. That is the Twitter handle of my developer relations team, Click Branch. So follow them for a lot of the open source projects that Click uses and a lot of the fun stuff we do with data analytics. And that is what happens when one of your coworkers dares you to go shirtless at a 40,000 plus conference. So that's me. All right, so this journey kind of started about April 2017 for me. We had sponsored a hackathon in Ottawa called Space Apps Ottawa. And if you haven't heard of Space Apps, it's actually a global hackathon where they give challenges for teams to create these cool projects. So we sponsored it, which gave me an opportunity to be a mentor at the actual hackathon. So my job was supposed to be to help participants whenever they had questions or were running into trouble. And that's something that I did do. But the problem is that April is also playoff season. So while these people were hard at work getting their projects done, and I was still helping them, but I was also streaming the hockey game at the same time. And so is anybody in the room Montreal Canadiens fans? Anybody? Senators. There you go. I was going to say Montreal sucks too, but that's not what this presentation's about. This presentation is about my team, the Ottawa Senators. So while I was at the hackathon and I was not paying attention as I should, I wanted to try to stay within that hackathon mindset. So I was trying to think of cool things that I could be doing, kind of multitasking in that sense. And while I was watching the game, I noticed this timeline at the bottom of the stream. And in the timeline, you can see there's little icons that are there. And it clicked in that they had to actually mean something. So when you hover over them, you see that they're plays. They're hits or passes or penalties, things like that. And my mind was clicking about the fact that there has to be a source for this. There has to be something. So I opened up my developer tools and I started looking in the network tab. And I managed to find that promising looking one entitled Live. So I took a look at the response of what I was getting. I realized it was a REST API, and I started seeing some pretty cool data. So it started with some game type data, which was interesting, but not all that much. And then it started getting into the actual teams themselves, which this is all pretty static stuff. There's not a whole lot going on there. But then I started getting into the players and some more interesting stuff, which was the actual plays of the game that was going on. So I was seeing things like missed shots, giveaways, face-offs, hits, which were really cool, and then, of course, the all-important goals. I was so excited by seeing this data, and I've only been working at Click for about a year and a half, but when you start seeing data in a new sense, you see data and you're like, oh, this is really awesome. So I was at the hackathon, and I was like, guys, check this out, look at all this cool data. I'm getting every single play from the game. And they were like, yeah, okay, but like we're like using machine learning to identify mosquito genomes, and it kind of made me feel stupid, but at the same time, I was like, this is some really cool stuff. So I'm gonna hold on to the link that I'm seeing here and see how much further I can end up going later on. Fast forward to now, kind of the February 2018 area. my team is doing bad. And when I say bad, I don't mean like this is good. I don't mean like normal bad. I mean like really bad. Like, I apologize to the Buffalo people for saying my team sucks, but yeah, we're basically at the bottom of the table, which is really not a good situation for us. And as a fan of a sports team, anybody who's a fan of a sports team can attest, it's really tough to watch your team drop down the table, particularly when your team has some really good players on it, and you can't understand why they're doing so badly when you have such good players. So I knew that I had this data, and I knew that I wanted to do something with it, so I needed to get some answers. So in order for me to get these answers, I kind of needed to go through a step-by-step process. The first one was to actually get the data itself. Then I needed to massage the data, because REST APIs are great, but they don't really come out of the box in a way that you can just start doing analytic stuff with it. So I had to massage the data, and then I had to go about actually visualizing the data in a way for me to be able to better understand it, and then I could get my insights. So my step one was getting the data. And the easiest way I figured was to start by getting all the games. I needed all the games that they've played, and the only place I could think of to quickly grab it was to actually look up their schedule. So I went on the NHL's website and found the schedule for the team, did the exact same thing that I did before. So I opened up my network tools and I started filtering out. I knew that the Stats API was called Stats API, and I found my schedule, and I found exactly what I was looking for, which was the game information for each of the games that they played. But one of the great parts about some of these REST APIs, I don't think it's a full standard yet, because I mean, a lot of stuff I do doesn't use it, but they had a link. So it took a lot of work out of my job, because it just gave me a link, which was fantastic. So I started by building a service, and the whole point of that service was to just get the games. So it was very easy. It's just build my URL and then get the response and take just the game data out of there is what I needed. And then I built myself an actual downloader to get the games, and then for each one, I pulled in the JSON and I saved it. So step one of my process was pretty easy. I literally just had to hack my way through into getting all of the games, which is great. I ended up with 82 JSON files, some of which were completed games, some of which were games that were yet to be played. So step two was massaging the data. So I can give a quick attestation to the NHL API itself is kind of crummy. If you look at some of the JSON stuff, there's a lot of types of duplication. So you have player information up at the top. If I make anybody seasick by scrolling, I apologize. So there's player information up here, and then they have player information all the way back down here. And then inside each of the plays, they've got more player information. And there's just a lot of duplication going on. So it's necessary to get the data into a position where I can actually use it. So I started off small. We have our data analytics engine. We've built a lot of JavaScript libraries to help things, and one of them is called Halyard.js. What that allows you to do is that actually allows you to very quickly create tables based on things like JavaScript arrays and plug that data right into the engine. So using Halyard.js, I started off small. I started with just my plays. So it was very much an iterative process of looking at the data, finding out what I wanted out of it, and then figuring out how to get it into a format that I needed from an easy perspective. So I started out with the plays. I just mapped through all the plays, and I grabbed what information I needed. That was fairly easy, and the first visualizations I could create with that were cool, but they're very simple. They were specified only to teams, and players weren't involved. And players are a big part of finding your answers. It's not just about the team. So the next thing I had to do was I had to go through the players. Now, the NHL API sucked in one sense, and that was that when it listed out the nice big list of players, it listed out their current team. So when I started working with actually massaging this data, for example, Ottawa Senators have a player called Kyle Turris that we traded away. So he's no longer with Ottawa. He's with, no? All right. So he's with another team. So this API was showing another team, even though the game is in, like he was playing for Ottawa at the time. So I had to look through the data and figure out a way to properly map him to the Ottawa team because the NHL wasn't doing it for me. So I managed to find some data down at the bottom in like the box scores where they listed out basically an array of player IDs for each team. So that helped, but it just goes to show the process of how like I need to massage the individual things. And so when I'm adding this data, I'm going back to kind of a relational approach, a relational database type approach. So my players had, each play had a play ID, and then each time a player was associated to a play, because there could be multiple players associated to a play, there was the play ID and then the player ID. So I went back to kind of this relational approach, which is interesting because you know the data is coming from more of a relational type approach, but then it's coming into a REST API, which is splitting out away from that, and then you're having to put that back, piece that back together in a way that is better for you. So it's kind of a cool process to go through, but at the same time, it can be tedious depending on what type of data you're working with. So I started by doing that, and I added the players and the associations to the players, and I started this all with just one file. I didn't want to have to be burdened about the whole thing of every single one of the games, so I started with just one file, and by the time I got that, I was like, oh, great. Now I had to actually expand out into games because each file was a game, and that wasn't a concept that I was looking into. But it was a fairly smooth but long process to massage the data into the way that I needed it. I'm going to end up putting this up all online at some point in case you're interested. But anyway, so step 3 of this process was to visualize the data. And I'll kind of go through the process of what I did. So I started by loading all the data in, and then once that happened, I went to, nope, wrong one. There we go. So I went into my mysense engine, and what you're seeing, what you're going to see right here, which is, all right, I got to log in. This is a server of mine that I have running on a VM. And this is the front-end client for our engine. So this is kind of like a front-end wrapper that we have, but the real power doesn't come specifically from this engine. From this client, it comes from the actual engine itself. From a developer perspective, the engine is the really important part. I'm not going to go through that today, but I'm just going to kind of show, like, this is all about the process that I took. So when I started visualizing my data, I figured that the teams and the players were most important. So I started by having my players. And I created my players here, and I just needed all the plays that they were involved in. Right? So I've got all my players here, but already I'm seeing there's something wrong, because when I'm looking at this visualization, I'm not going to want to look at overall plays. I'm going to want to look at averages per game. So I had to end up updating that to filter it down by the games. So here we're seeing just the plays that they're involved in, but we need to focus that even more, because in order to find proper insights, we want to see the actual plays that they're involved in. So the next thing that I did was I brought in a list of the actual plays that were available. So you can see here I have, blocked shots, face-offs. These ones, so game end, game official, game schedule, those are the more metadata type plays, where it's just, when the game started, that kind of stuff. And then each type of play could have multiple player types. So for instance, a blocked shot has a shooter and a blocker. So each player involved in these had an actual player type. So this is going good, and I can already start to do kind of some of these where I can, say, I want to see the winners of face-offs, right? And I'm seeing this here. which is great, and it kind of shows an overall view of the sense that, you know, if you're looking here in the averages for the games, there aren't a whole lot of Ottawa players. Now, one of the problems here is that you're not really able to see the teams. So I had to actually update that as well and add a color based on what their team was. Oh yeah, I screwed that one up there. Player team. Right, so now each team, each player is involved in a different team. One of the next thing I wanted to do was I wanted to try to be able to filter out teams. So let's say sometime this week, Ottawa is going to be playing against Montreal, and I really wanted to know that. So I actually ended up doing two pieces for that. So I created the same kind of filter list that you're seeing here to get the actual teams, and those were allowing me to get easy selections. And then at the same time, I also create a chart that had the teams. And then there, I could do the same averages per game. Right? So here you're seeing, like it's a chart, which is great, but there's like an other section because there's too many people to actually show. So now what I can do is I could say, I want to see any time that Ottawa plays Montreal. Right? So now, and so in my data, there's actually team name, which is specific to a play, and then there's player team, which is specific to the team. So a play always has like a team associated to it. So if there's a blocked shot, then the blocker is like the team of that shot. So when I filter down, now I'm seeing, right? So against Montreal, we don't do too bad, I guess, overall in plays, but we want to look at things like, you know, we want to see the average shots per game, right? So we can already start, even while I'm building my visualizations out, I'm starting to see that Ottawa's already being dominated in some of these plays. So in this sense, creating the visualizations and finding my insights are kind of playing together at the same time. And then I added in a couple more cool things. So for instance, not good at the drag and drop. So I wanted to add in periods as well. So I could do something like, Ottawa has an unfathomably bad record in the second period. So their plus minus for periods 1 and 3 are like hovering around 0, and then period 2 is like minus 22. It's the worst in the league. It's ridiculous. So this is just kind of the process that I went through for step 3 of my whole implementation, which was visualizing my data. And then step 4 was finding my insights. And so finding my insights and visualizing the data kind of came together, but now is the time where I can really start playing around with the insights that I have. So I'm going to go to this one, which is almost the same, but there's a bunch of other stuff in here. Right? So this is where I can really start finding my answers. I have my teams, and I can start looking into, so overall, how are we doing with face-offs against people? And I can see that, like, in the beginning, there's no Ottawa players in like the top left here. And then I'll focus down and I'll say, well, so against Montreal, we're doing okay with faceoffs. So we've got most of the top 10. But if we move over to, let's say, Pittsburgh, right? Oh, we're not doing too bad with Pittsburgh either. It's fantastic. They're a good team. But then I can look over at shots, right? And I can see, okay, so Pittsburgh's doing pretty decently on shots against us. We're about even. So this is the time where I get to find the actual insights into my data and try to figure out why my team is such a crappy team this year. I added minutes in there too, because I thought it would be interesting to see types of data like, so how does Ottawa do in terms of shots? So I'll take shooter, because shots will include blocked shot, missed shot, and overall shots, like on-target shots. and I want to see how they do in the first 5 minutes of a game, right? So you can see over here, and I think, is Ottawa even on here? So Ottawa isn't even, they're in the others column, which is like the lower column of people actually getting things done here. So this was step 4 of my process, which was of finding my actual insights. And all right, I'll sell my product a tiny bit. So my product, Click allows me to do this a lot easier because Click takes an associative approach to data. So instead of building individual charts to answer individual questions, we kind of have more of a concept of show your data as a whole and allow the user to find their own insights, their own answers into the questions that they might have. So building it out like this was the way to allow me to actually get my own insights. And then eventually, when I make this public, then other people can find their own insights too, which is great to see. So what did I learn? About my team, I learned that they suck. I learned that like they're missing all the key types of plays. So when I went into my insights and I was looking around, I was seeing when it came to important things like hits, they're nowhere to be found. When it came to like face-offs, they're decent on. Shots, they're okay, but hits are bad. They're taking so many penalties all the time. Like these are all the different insights that I was able to grab from this, and it's that they're missing all their key plays. About data itself, in this process, I learned that there's so much free data out there. Just with the NHL one, it goes to show you how this kind of single-page app, JavaScript updating, and the need for a backend like a REST API gives everybody so much access to data that it's awesome. It's truly awesome because they have that live stream and they need to constantly send data forward to the client. We as developers can take advantage of that and we can say, all right, we can actually look at this data ourselves and do what we want with it. You have to look for it. So I wasn't able to just have like a nice table of everything on a page. I had to dig in. I had to go into my developer tools, see what I've done this on other occasions, and sometimes you really have to look through the network requests to find what you're looking for. So you've got to look for it, but it's definitely out there. And you'll need to work with it. Unless you're being contracted to a project where they have the APIs and the documentation, you're probably not going to be getting the data in the way you want to work with it. So you're going to have to manipulate it in order to get it to where you need. So that's what I learned in this whole process. What are my next steps? So I'm looking at possibly downloading other seasons. The entire API is available to me. And it'd be nice to have a historical look at how Ottawa's been doing against other teams. That would be fun. Maybe download the games for all teams. You know, I'm not selfish. I built this just for me, but if you build it properly, you can build it in a way that it's expandable to everybody. So it'd be nice to download that data and make it available for everyone to kind of play around and find their own answers. And then maybe to other teams. So the interesting thing, here, I'll show you this really quick. So when I look at this, this is really awesome. This is some data. If you look right up here, that's the MLB logo. That's Major League Baseball. So that's already given me another answer into data that I'm in the US, you guys are baseball fans, right? So this is open to baseball. Feel free to figure out that and take advantage of that too. I need to get better at creating visualizations. So I'm a hardcore developer. I'm a code monkey. My design skills are very not up to par. From a Click perspective, so our engine has like a WebSocket API, and our developer relations team has built out a community that allows our customers to create extensions, not just for this client, but also create projects based on our engine. So I could very much leverage that in order to get my visualizations more up to par than what you were seeing with the basic Sense client. And then my next step is probably to try to send this information to the Ottawa Senators, getting good with the management, and score some free season tickets. That'd be fantastic. So this is the process I went through. This is the fun that I had. I hope you learned something, at least in terms of how to start mining some data. I'm free to take any questions that anybody might have. Yes, sir. Right. So the question was, did I run into any issues with the authentication? Actually, for that API, I didn't. So if you're watching those games, and they use that API not just for games, but for their whole website, right? So the whole schedule has to be available, all the box stats for the games have to be available, and because they have such a large user base, they can't even rate limit the API, right? Because everybody's looking at it all the time. It's huge. So when you get into situations like that, you can kind of really take advantage. And as long as you're not a jerk and like pinging it every 3 milliseconds, downloading the entire league, then they're not even really going to care, right? It's better for the NHL that they get their information out there in different ways, and if they don't have to pay you to start showing off these stats, they're probably going to be more happy about it. You mean in terms of like you're asking hockey questions, or? So yeah, I mean, when you're looking at visualizations, it's important for you to have a proper understanding of the context. So someone who isn't really an NHL fan might not get a whole lot out of this, and someone who's not a hockey fan might not, okay, yeah, like what is necessarily a shooter? Why would there be like a blocker player type down here? So the context of the visualizations themselves are kind of important. It would be a little useless for you to try to look at some of like the internal financial data that large companies have when you have no context behind them. So I mean, for this individual one, this up here are the players, and each of these colors represents the team that they're on. So matching colors, and I'll try to do this, I'm colorblind. Are those two the same?
I think so.
Yeah, okay, so they would be on the same team then. And I can even verify that. Nope, so they're not. One Chicago Blackhawks, one is Detroit Red Wings. But so that's what the colors are supposed to be, is they're tied into the team. And then down here is the player type. So in every play, there's a player involved. So like if you're looking at face-offs, there's a winner and a loser. And there's always a winner and loser, so this visualization doesn't help much because it's 50-50, but it does allow you to say, I only want to look at winners and see all the players there, or I only want to look at losers, and not with face-offs, but here you look at hits, and you have hitter and hitee. So you go to hitee, and you see, there's probably a lot of Ottawa players up in this area right here. So yes, the context of the visualizations is important.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So the front end, it's not the platform, it's the client that we've built. Okay. So our main product, and I'm not going to try to get too salesy about it, our main product is the associative engine itself. That's where all the power comes from. We've built chatbots based off it and a whole bunch of different things. But this is our front end, and this is how we try to make data visualization creation easy for people. And then it gets a little more, in the back end, you can install extensions that you find on like our Click Branch website. We have like a whole bunch of extensions, which is these are all community sourced, open source extensions that people have created. And they're not limited to actual visualizations. So you can see if you go down here, right, we have a chatbot here. A lot of them are like integrations between like data sets and Click, but so this is our community. And if you're not good at visualizations and you want to try Click and this isn't enough, there's a whole community out there to help you. And we have a big Slack, like we have a whole huge Slack for our client base as well, where you can go in and ask questions and stuff. With Click, so it depends on how you want to go. So there's a desktop version that's actually free. There's a server version, and right now we have like an enterprise licensing model, but we're moving towards a subscription model. And then we also have different offerings. So this is like the Click Sense offering, and then we have just the platform by itself. And we're looking at later on this year, we're coming out with like a Dockerized version of the engine. And so that's why we created a bunch of JavaScript libraries as well to help with things like data loading, right? Because if you don't have a front end, data loading, unless you have like a helper library, data loading is not going to be easy. So we have different areas. So we have Click Branch. This is our community site. We also have Click Playground, and what Click Playground is a site that we, the developer relations team, created, where you can actually go in and play around with the Sense server with some curated data sets that we created. So for instance, we have like a showcase section, which these are all actual, it hurt me to put this one up here, by the way, Toronto Maple Leafs. But anyway, so these are all the different things you can kind of look at, and then we have tryout buttons for ones that we actually have GitHub repos on for you to go with that, or you can go into the My Playground, and we have sample data sets you can start working with, or you can actually connect into like your GitHub, your Spotify, your Twitter through their APIs and pull your data out of there and start playing with it. So yeah. And then aside from that, there's like the main docs. And we're coming out with some more developer initiatives later on in the year to really help with things. So. Anybody else? Yes. So we have a couple of different methods, and I'm not running the latest version of our client, but there's some really awesome stuff that we're doing with that. So there's charts, and the charts are basically you move over and you add in your dimensions and your measures of what you want to show. We also have a list of fields, and it's not this version, but if it's not out in the next version, it's out in the version after that. And we're now in a schedule of releasing every 4 times a year. It starts looking at what that data actually is, and it will start doing things like creating different visualizations than just the filter pane based on what the data is that you're pulling in.
So those are independent of one another. We don't, again, you're not
Right.
creating some functional pipeline.
Right, no, that wasn't me. That's all in the client. I'm gonna cut off, but we do, if you have a lot of these click questions, we do have a booth in like the showcase area where you get coffee and stuff, and I'd be more than happy to show off some of the fun stuff that we do. Any other questions about like my journey? Perfect, you guys were great today. Oh, sorry, one more.
Question about
There's a lot. There's a lot of them. If you come by our booth, I can try to show you some. Cool? All right, thanks a lot, guys.